Have you guys noticed that literally nothing is ever good enough for some people? Specifically in media. No matter the overall quality of a work, you'll always have some whack job who will complain about how stuff was off in one specific scene or how one character got robbed of the arc they deserved. This isn't an antagonistic video. I bring this point up because I literally have been that guy in the past. I didn't get my start talking about how shit Fate Stay Night was and how it messed up Best Girl Ilya for nothing. But this particular issue is one where I'm on the complete other side of the fence, not huffing my own fumes over what surmounts to minor things. Visual novel translations have a sort of reputation, you see. Fan trans or otherwise, you'll always find someone who hates the anglicized version and how it ruins the intention. Usually the same people who don't speak Japanese, but I'll digress on that point. Again though, this video isn't antagonistic in nature. I think I have a kind of unique take on this absolutely dog water discourse because, truly, I don't think everything is all good or all bad. It's a pish-posh mishmash of gray, flippish garbage. But one man's trash is another's treasure, as they say, and I found diamonds and shit here. Real quick, to my audience that watches all of my videos, 1, have I mentioned you look lovely today? But 2, to explain the end of last week's video, this was all a cut thought molecule from it. That being the case, the first thing I want to talk about is the translation of Tsukihime. More specifically, Mirror Moon / fan translations as a whole, but specifically Suki, because let's face it, I am very intimate with it. Plus, it's actually a good starting point, but that's besides the point. Tsukihime does not have a good translation. It's quite pissful, actually. Nostalgia blinders off, read Suki and tell me it deserves praise for prose. Because it doesn't. Sentences are obtuse and repeated back to back, the pace can just be stopped with a few garish lines here and there, and yeah, it's very, very stilted. To jump the gun and explain this in a way most people will get, this is how Fate Stay Night ended up with lines like defenseless anus and die when they are killed. That kind of wording is all over and worse in Suki. Yeah, I'm ashamed to admit it, my favorite VN of all time, Umineko pending, has no fucking good diction to speak of. There's hardly any flow in Suki despite how I portrayed it in my multiple videos on it. I get the feeling a lot of other people in this small subsect of a niche subsect of the interwebs appreciate Tsukihime mainly based on literal vibes. There's a lot of good in the story, and credit where it's due, I believe wholeheartedly that Mirror Moon succeeds in conveying the actual plot. I mean, in general, their translations are understandable at a base level, which, as we'll get into, is amazing. However, and back to the point, their word choice makes it clear that they were fans first and writers second. These guys literally just needed more proofreaders. A stance which, I understand, is ultimately a nag to most people with a visual novel brain rot. I mean, you guys are used to eating dog food, but still. I personally think it does matter to a work that it flows and doesn't take you out of the experience every other sentence. This is honest to God my personal biggest issue with visual novel translations, and it's just all over the medium, especially in its early days. Half of me has to wonder if Sayano Uta was actually as bad as I thought it was, or if it was just a really shitty translation issue. That said, and again to bat for both sides, I'm not intentionally dunking on Mirror Moon here. I feel pretty confident in stating that they are the sole reason visual novels are a thing in the West. At the very least, I know I sure as hell wouldn't be here without their Fate Stay Night translation. But MM's stuff doesn't hit like it's supposed to because of the wording. To those of you who are longtime viewers, I cried at things in Tsukihime not because of the prose, but because of the themes and subtext. Particularly how it hits for me personally based on my experiences. If you've been keeping tabs, when I'm not breaking down what a VN is in those Type Moon videos, that interpersonal nonsense is my main point. I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I have this vague idea of the story of Suki in my head, and that will always be better than actually reading it. My headcanon is canon, as it were. Now, credit where it's due, there are certain moments where things are harmonious in Mirror Moon's translations. For instance, I think the horror of being trapped inside your mind is something they get across f***ing excellently, with the cyclical monologue spiraling out into madness working in the VN's favor. See, even a bad quirk, that being Mirror Moon's proclivity to repeat dialogue over and over again, can be used for good. It's all a matter of where it's applied. Outside of such instances though, I do think as a whole the translations Mirror Moon did are a double-edged sword in a way. For example, I said earlier that the fanbase for visual novels probably wouldn't exist today without them. However, it could also be a lot bigger than it is today. I know from hearing accounts, ancillary I know, but bear with me, that many people have just abandoned VNs as a medium because of Mirror Moon's Fate translation. Margin of error here, Fate is also Nasu at his worst, but that's a whole tangent I've talked about before. Specifically with the translation stuff, however, the Prelude tends to be the biggest gatekeeper to visual novels as a medium I can honestly think of as a whole. Just go out and ask people who have tried to read Fate what has gatekept them, and it is the explanation of the magic systems. It's the explanations that are just like front-loaded heavily, and then proceed to be repeated throughout the plot ad nauseum. If you have my analysis brain cancer where you overcontemplate each line, you can eventually get the overall point, but like, if you're someone reading for fun, then yeah, I get it. It reads like shit, and the point is drowned out in how vague it is despite the wordiness. Fate Stay Night's magic system, in translation, literally reads like a f***ing parody. Seriously, go and read it with an ironic tone of voice and tell me it doesn't. Please take into account again that Mirror Moon did succeed at getting the points of the works across as well as the theming. That is something I will not discount them for. Their main issues are literally word choice that leaves me with what feels like an approximation of a story instead of the actual text, which, only being one layer removed, is commendable because the next translation I want to talk about is not that, at least partially. See, Subarashiki Hibi / Wonderful Everyday is a very odd work translation-wise. The first 4 chapters of Suba were translated by passionate fans who clearly knew their shit. They're eloquent, beautiful, and leave me with little to no notes. However, it was at that point in translation that the TL was picked up by Just USA, a big old company who wanted the translation released that moment. As a result, the last few chapters were, by admittance of most people on the project, a total rush job, which you can feel while reading. The quality drop-off between Looking Glass Insects and Jabberwocky is actually kind of insane. Like, brief spoilers here, that some people didn't get that Tomosane was plural is understandable to me. However, the sloppy TL isn't what most people seem to care about, which is baffling to me personally, but this wouldn't be the first time I had a contrarian opinion. Anyways, the main thing people know about Suba is that there's one word that is overused from the midway point on. This word became the arbiter for people writing off Suba as a bad translation and work entirely, which I think is just unfair. That word is the F-slur, which, if that offends you, I'm sorry, I'm gonna be saying it a few times, okay? From an objective standpoint, the overuse of this word is not a proper translation. The character Tomosane isn't actively slinging slurs around at rapid fire, but the TL defaults to using f*** because it's easier than thinking up the context of what he's actually saying. I can't think of the word and I don't want to look it up, but its context is mainly just referring to dudes who like dudes. It's not necessarily derogatory. The derision comes from how it's said, you know, the context of the conversation. Japanese is simply just a language like that. You have to look at the context for nearly everything to get what the overall point is. Total side tangent, but no one agreeing on the proper wording for a translation of a show like Cowboy Bebop is proof of that. This little juncture, this word of divisiveness, is where my hottest take comes in, however. See, while I do care about how shittily the VN as a whole is translated past Looking Glass Insects, I don't really care about the usage of the F-slur because the word f*** it is kind of funny to me. Like, Tomosane just tossing that out always makes me laugh. Not to mention, I think it's at the very least tonally consistent for a world set in 2012, but that's besides the point in making up excuses for something that most people aren't going to agree with. I must confess to you all, I let a lot of things slide media-wise on the basis of if I find them funny, irregardless of if they're an objective flaw or not. For example, the quote, "people die when they are killed," not funny, ergo a flaw, back to the drawing board. Euphoria being full of scad, however, funny, ergo it's the best visual novel ever made. I am a very serious person, guys, you gotta understand. But yeah, I don't honestly understand why the community is so vitriolic of this word, because it's clear Tomosane uses it as a term of endearment at the end, which like, maybe it's just in my own local dirt, but guys do that all the time. Calling someone a mean name in an endearing manner is proof that you care, and that clearly comes across when Tomo's singing to himself about the fags in the bar he works at. Sure, he's bigoted at first, but he overcomes his homophobia at the end, and it's really beautiful, isn't it? It's a real message we can all aspire to, I think. However, I suppose this is indicative of people's proclivity to get caught up on one thing. Subahibi's translation is flawed from chapter 4 onward in a way worse than Mirror Moon could do on an off day, but people couldn't care less because it has a bad word, frowny face. Honestly, as weird as it sounds, I can't help but be reminded of Dragon Maid. In particular, the one line about the patriarchy that all of the virgin neckbeards got hung up on back in 2014. It was an issue that you could not walk 3 feet in the anime sphere without hearing about. And it was insufferable to me because the biggest offense about the dub/translation of Dragon Maid wasn't that it was hashtag woke, it was that it hashtag sucked. Unrelated, go watch my Dragon Maid Elma video, please. No one watched it because I'm a VN channel, but I really liked making it. I think it's good. Link up top. Anyways, this all boils down to me wishing people had the mental capacity to not just focus on one thing. The patriarchy line in Dragon Maid isn't even a bad moment. It's one of the few moments in the dub that's actually funny because of how fucking absurd it is, and it still gets the point of the scene across. But this is stepping into what is and isn't good about localization territory, and I want to focus more on translations. Which reminds me, I was talking about Subahibi. Hey, do you ever think about how most people who read that VN only have their favorite chapters as one of the first 4? I think that's pretty interesting based on how those are the only chapters with a good translation. I suppose, however, that I should stop and clarify here that the most I've ever read in Japanese is Yotsuba. So, you know, I'm not the absolute knowledgeable god on this topic. I have not read any visual novel in Japanese, but I do like to think I know what good writing is, and I sure as hell feel like I know what a good translation is after submerging myself in this world for f***ing years at this point. Basically though, take all of what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Or don't. It's up to you. You're my audience. I don't f***ing care. That's all I got for Subahibi though. Let's talk about a positive translation for once, yeah? I mean positive as in, you know, as long as you're not looking at all the grammatical errors, because sheesh, there is a lot in When They Cry. But overall, When They Cry has a translation that most people have surprisingly little to say about. I haven't seen any brain-dead takes on Higu and Umi other than, you know, that people think it's legitimately not anti-capitalist because just fucking did you read it? But I think that's a sign of a good translation. You know, other than a few hiccups here and there grammatically. This is a whole other issue, but translators should really be paid more. Like, a lot more. They are the main reason any of you can enjoy anything. The solution isn't to boycott all official translations. Support the good ones like Higu if you can. There is always a need for good translations like this. To hell with everything else, fucking support what you like. Though of course, the actual quality of Manga Gamer is kinda up there sometimes. But that's besides the point. Maybe I'll make a video about that someday. Up to you all. Again, I am privy to the whimsy of my audience because I want views. Honestly though, I don't really have much to say about Higu or Umi's translations. I bring them up as a positive because they succeed where others don't. I've been slowly working my way through When They Cry for the past year, and not once, other than a few grammatical errors, which are mainly just a thing in Higurashi, they seem to have really upped their game in Umineko, have I been taken out of the experience. These works are examples of TLs done well, and proof that VNs have a future in the West. Sadly, it's the sheer length of Higurashi and Umineko that keep people away, but you know, if we keep getting translations on the same level of quality and shorter visual novels, I legitimately think they could have the same mass appeal of anime in the West. We already have works like Clannad and now MaHoYo over here, which seem to have taken the community by storm, and more importantly, are official releases that get people excited. This is all hopeful brained on my part, but I like to think these Japanese companies will look at the sales overseas and be like, huh, this is a market here. Should look into that. I, for one, know I'll be fucking ecstatic if more visual novels keep coming out. This is a fucking pipe dream, but like, an official translation of Fate Stay Night that's actually good would just blow up the community. I legitimately think that because it has so much fucking mass appeal already with that shitty gacha game. This community is a powder keg waiting to explode. Maybe I'm being hopeful though. Maybe. I'd like to think I'm not though. And anyways, though some translations will inevitably falter in the ways I've brought up prior, I think moving forward the community is in a pretty good spot. I hope you've all enjoyed this short little video. I gotta say goodbye for now. I'm gonna go prepare something a little more substantial for next week's video, LOL.